I need to tell you something about Libras that honestly, most people completely miss. And I'm not talking about the surface level stuff you read in every astrology article. I'm talking about the real power that makes Libras absolutely unstoppable in ways that shock even people who've known them for years. Here's what I've been noticing. And this has been fascinating to watch. When you first meet a Libra, they seem so easygoing, so pleasant, so focused on keeping everyone happy. And because of that, people make this massive mistake. They underestimate them. They think Libras are pushovers. People pleasers who'll bend to anyone's will just to avoid conflict. But that couldn't be further from the truth. I really believe Libras are playing a completely different game than everyone else. And by the time people realize what's actually happening, the Libra has already won. Does that resonate with you? Because if you're a Libra watching this, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You've seen that moment when someone realizes you're not who they thought you were. That moment when they understand you've been 10 steps ahead the entire time. And if you're not a Libra but you have one in your life, maybe you've experienced this yourself. That strange realization that the person you thought was so agreeable and accommodating has actually been orchestrating everything from behind the scenes. It's not manipulation in a negative sense. It's strategic brilliance operating at a level most people can't even perceive. Now, before we dive into these 6 secrets, I want you to understand something really important. What makes Libras unstoppable isn't just one trait or one ability. It's how everything works together. It's the combination of qualities that creates this force that's almost impossible to resist or defeat. And honestly, once you see how this works, you'll never look at Libras the same way again. The first secret, and this is the one that absolutely floors people when they finally understand it, is that Libras have this incredible ability to see every angle of every situation simultaneously. Not just 2 sides. Every single angle. Every perspective. Every possible outcome. And they're doing this in real time. Constantly. Without even trying. Think about what that actually means. While most people are stuck seeing things from their own point of view, maybe considering one other perspective if they're really trying, Libras are operating like they have this 360-degree vision of reality. They see what you want, what the other person wants, what the third person in the room wants, what everyone's afraid of, what everyone's hoping for, and how all of those things intersect and conflict and align. I've watched this happen so many times. You'll be in a meeting or a family discussion or any situation where there's tension or disagreement, and everyone's dug into their position, convinced they're right, and then the Libra speaks up, and somehow, in a way that seems almost magical, they find this solution that nobody else saw. A path forward that honors everyone's needs while resolving the conflict. And here's what's wild about this. They're not doing it to show off. They're not doing it for recognition. A lot of times, they'll present the solution in a way that makes someone else look good. That lets someone else take credit. Because for Libras, it's not about ego. It's about the outcome. It's about creating harmony and balance in a way that actually works. Not just surface level peace that falls apart the moment you stop maintaining it. But here's where it gets really interesting. And this is the part most people never realize. This ability to see all angles isn't just about conflict resolution. Libras are using this in every single interaction, every decision, every relationship. They're constantly calculating, not in a cold way, but in this incredibly sophisticated way that takes into account emotional dynamics, power structures, long-term consequences, and immediate needs all at once. Have you ever wondered why Libras seem to always land on their feet? Why they somehow end up in advantageous positions even when situations seem chaotic? This is why. They're seeing possibilities and pathways that other people don't even know exist. And they're making moves based on that expanded vision while everyone else is still trying to figure out what's happening on the surface level. And I really want you to understand this because it's crucial to everything else we're going to talk about. This isn't about being sneaky or underhanded. Libras genuinely want everyone to win. They genuinely want harmony and fairness. But they've learned often through painful experience. That real harmony doesn't come from just being nice and agreeable. It comes from understanding the full complexity of any situation and finding solutions that address that complexity. The second secret, and this one is going to surprise you, is that Libras have this almost supernatural ability to read people. Not just surface level reading. I'm talking about seeing into the core of who someone is. What drives them, what scares them, what they're hiding, sometimes before that person even fully knows it themselves. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Lots of people are good at reading others. Empaths do it. Psychologists do it. What makes Libras different? And here's the thing. Libras aren't just reading emotions or picking up on body language. Though they're excellent at both of those things. They're reading the entire energetic signature of a person. They're picking up on inconsistencies between what someone says and what they actually want. They're noticing the tiny micro-expressions, the shifts in tone, the things people do when they think no one's watching. I've seen Libras meet someone for the first time and within minutes, sometimes within seconds, they've got this person completely figured out. Not in a judgmental way. Libras are actually incredibly non-judgmental, which is part of why people feel so comfortable around them. But they see you. They see the real you underneath whatever mask you're wearing, whatever role you're playing. And here's what makes this so powerful. Because Libras see you so clearly, they know exactly how to interact with you in a way that makes you feel understood, valued, seen. They know what you need to hear. They know what approach will work with you. They know when to push and when to back off. They know how to get you to open up, to trust them, to let them in. Does this sound familiar? If you've ever felt this instant connection with a Libra, this sense that they just get you in a way most people don't. This is why. They're not faking it. They genuinely do understand you. But they're understanding you at a level that's almost uncomfortable if you really think about it. Because it means they're seeing things about you that you might not want anyone to see. Now, here's where this gets really interesting in terms of why Libras are unstoppable. Because they can read people so accurately, they're incredibly difficult to deceive or manipulate. You can't play games with a Libra and win. You can't lie. People do try. But the Libra sees right through it. They see what you're actually doing, what you're actually after, what you're actually afraid of, and they're making decisions based on that reality, not the performance you're putting on. I've watched people try to manipulate Libras, try to use emotional tactics or power plays or whatever strategy they think will work, and the Libra just sits there, completely calm, completely composed, seeing exactly what's happening. And then they respond in a way that completely neutralizes the manipulation while maintaining perfect politeness and grace. It's honestly beautiful to watch if you know what you're looking at. But there's another layer to this that I think is really important. Because Libras can read people so well, they also know how to protect themselves. They know who to trust and who to keep at arm's length. They know who's genuine and who's performing. They know who will be there when things get hard and who will disappear. And they make decisions about their relationships based on that knowledge. This is why you'll sometimes see Libras who seem friendly with everyone but are actually only truly close to a very select few people. They're not being fake with the others. They're just being appropriately bound to read based on what they've observed and understood about those people. They give everyone kindness and respect. But they reserve their real trust, their real vulnerability, their real depth for people who've proven they can handle it. The third secret, and this is the one that really explains why Libras are so unstoppable in professional and creative contexts, is their ability to create beauty and harmony out of chaos. Not just appreciate beauty, create it, manifest it, bring it into existence where it didn't exist before. Libra is ruled by Venus, and Venus isn't just about aesthetics in a shallow sense. Venus is about the principle of attraction, of magnetism, of creating something so compelling that people can't help but be drawn to it. And Libras have this ability hardwired into their being. They see potential for beauty and balance in situations where other people only see mess and conflict. I've watched Libras walk into chaotic environments, whether that's a disorganized workspace, a dysfunctional team, a creative project that's falling apart, and within a surprisingly short amount of time, they've transformed it. Not through force, not through aggressive management, through this almost alchemical process of rearranging elements, shifting dynamics, introducing new perspectives, until suddenly everything just works better. And here's what's fascinating about this. Libras don't just create surface-level beauty. They create functional beauty. Beauty that serves a purpose. Harmony that actually makes things work more efficiently. They understand that true aesthetics and true functionality aren't separate things. They're the same thing. When something is truly well designed, truly balanced, it's both beautiful and effective. This is why Libras are so often successful in fields like design, architecture, law, any area where you need to take complex, conflicting elements and create something coherent and appealing out of them. They have this natural genius for it. And what makes them unstoppable is that they're not just doing this in their professional lives. They're doing it in every aspect of their existence. A Libra will organize their home in a way that's both aesthetically pleasing and incredibly functional. They'll structure their relationships in a way that honors everyone's needs while maintaining balance. They'll approach problems in a way that finds elegant solutions rather than brute force answers. Everything they touch tends to become more harmonious, more balanced, more beautiful. And I really want you to understand the power of this, because it's easy to dismiss it as just being good at decorating or having good taste. But what Libras are actually doing is much more profound. They're creating environments, relationships, and systems that naturally attract success, that naturally draw people in, that naturally function at a higher level. They're not fighting against chaos. They're transforming it into order. And that transformation is magnetic. I've been thinking about this a lot lately. And there's a fourth secret about Libras that I think is absolutely crucial to understanding why they're so unstoppable. And this one might actually be the most misunderstood aspect of their personality. People think Libras avoid conflict because they're weak or scared. But that's not what's happening at all. Libras don't avoid conflict. They strategically choose their battles with a level of precision that would make a military general jealous. And when they do engage, when they decide a situation is worth fighting for, they fight in a way that's almost impossible to defend against. Because they've been watching, learning, understanding every angle, and they only move when they know they can win. Here's what I've observed, and this has been really eye-opening for me. Most people engage in conflict reactively. Someone says something that bothers them. They react. Someone crosses a boundary. They push back immediately. But Libras are playing a completely different game. They're letting things unfold. They're gathering information. They're understanding motivations and weaknesses and pressure points. And they're waiting for the exact right moment to make their move. I watched this happen with a Libra colleague once. There was someone in the office who was taking credit for other people's work, creating this toxic dynamic where everyone was frustrated, but nobody wanted to directly confront this person because they had connections to upper management. Everyone was complaining in private but staying silent in public. Except the Libra. The Libra wasn't complaining at all. They were just observing, documenting, being perfectly pleasant to everyone, including the person causing the problems. And then one day, in a meeting with senior leadership, the situation came up naturally. Not because the Libra forced it, but because they'd positioned things so that it would come up. And when it did, the Libra had every piece of evidence ready. Not presented in an aggressive way. Not presented as an attack. Just calm, factual information that made the situation completely clear to everyone in the room. The person who'd been taking credit couldn't deny it. The leadership couldn't ignore it. And the whole dynamic shifted in one conversation. That's Libra strategy. They don't rush into battle. They don't waste energy on fights they can't win or that aren't worth winning. But when they do engage, they've already won before the other person even realizes there's a conflict happening. And they do it in a way that maintains their reputation. their relationships, their standing. They come out looking reasonable and fair while completely achieving their objective. And I really want you to understand this because it's so different from how most people operate. Most people think power comes from being loud, from being aggressive, from making sure everyone knows when you're upset or when you disagree. But Libras understand that real power is quiet. Real power is strategic. Real power is know when to speak and when to stay silent, when to act and when to wait. This is why you'll sometimes see Libras in situations where they seem to be going along with something they clearly don't agree with, and people mistake that for weakness or people-pleasing. But what's actually happening is the Libra is choosing not to waste their energy on that particular battle. They're saving their ammunition for something that actually matters. And when that moment comes, when they decide something is worth fighting for, they bring everything they've been holding back. And it's devastating in the most elegant way possible. The fifth secret, and this one is really fascinating to me, is that Libras have this incredible ability to make people feel like they're the most important person in the room. Not in a fake way, not in a manipulative way, but in a way that's so genuine and so complete that it creates this almost magnetic pull that people can't resist. I've been studying this because it's such a powerful social skill. And I think it's one of the main reasons Libras end up in positions of influence and leadership, even when they're not actively seeking those positions. When you're talking to a Libra, when you have their attention, they make you feel seen in a way that's actually pretty rare. They're not looking over your shoulder to see who else is in the room. They're not checking their phone. They're not waiting for their turn to talk. They're genuinely present with you, genuinely interested in what you're saying, genuinely engaged with your perspective. And here's what makes this so powerful. In a world where most people are so focused on themselves, so caught up in their own thoughts and agendas and need to be heard, someone who actually listens, who actually pays attention, who actually makes you feel valued, that person becomes incredibly influential. Because people will do almost anything for someone who makes them feel that way. I've watched Libras build these incredible networks of people who are genuinely devoted to them, who will go out of their way to help them, who speak highly of them even when they're not around. And it's not because the Libra is using people or manipulating them. It's because the Libra has made each of those people feel genuinely valued and appreciated. They've invested real attention and care into those relationships. And people remember that. People respond to that. But there's something even deeper happening here that I think is really important to understand. Libras aren't just making people feel important as a social strategy. They genuinely find people interesting. They genuinely want to understand different perspectives. They genuinely value the unique qualities that each person brings. So when they make you feel seen and valued, it's not an act. It's a reflection of how they actually perceive you. And this creates this interesting dynamic where Libras end up being the person everyone wants to talk to. Everyone wants advice from. Everyone wants in their corner. Not because they're the loudest or the most charismatic in an obvious way, but because they've created these deep, genuine connections with people that make those people feel loyal to them. I've seen this play out in so many contexts. In professional settings, Libras often become the person everyone goes to when they need help navigating office politics or resolving conflicts. In social groups, they become the glue that holds everyone together. The person who remembers everyone's birthday and makes sure everyone feels included. In families, they often end up being the mediator. The one who keeps communication flowing between people who might otherwise drift apart. And what makes this unstoppable is that Libras are building this influence without anyone really noticing it's happening. They're not announcing their importance. They're not demanding recognition. They're just consistently showing up for people in a way that makes those people want to show up for them in return. And over time, that creates this web of relationships and influence that's incredibly powerful and incredibly difficult for anyone to disrupt. The sixth secret, and this is the one that I think really ties everything together, is that Libras have this almost supernatural ability to play the long game. Not just in terms of patience, though they have that too, but in terms of understanding how actions today create outcomes months or years down the line. They're thinking in timelines that most people don't even consider. I've been really fascinated by this because it's such a different way of operating than what we see in most of modern culture, which is so focused on immediate results, instant gratification, quick wins. But Libras are out here playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers. They're making moves that don't make sense in the moment, but that position them perfectly for opportunities that haven't even emerged yet. Here's a concrete example of what I mean. I know a Libra who took a job that seemed like a step down from where they were. Less money, less prestige, less obvious opportunity. Everyone around them was confused. Why would you take that position when you could stay where you are or push for something better? But the Libra saw something nobody else saw. They saw that this company was about to go through a major transition. They saw that the person they'd be working under was likely to get promoted within a year. They saw that the skills they'd develop in this role would be exactly what the industry would need in 3 years. And they were right. Within 18 months. They'd been promoted twice. Within 3 years. They were leading a department that didn't even exist when they took that initial job. And everyone who'd questioned their decision was suddenly asking them how they knew, how they saw it coming. And the truth is night. They didn't know for certain, but they understood the patterns. They understood the trajectory. They understood how to position themselves so that when opportunities emerged, they'd be the obvious choice. This long game thinking shows up in how Libras handle relationships too. They don't burn bridges. Ever. Even when someone has wronged them. Even when they'd be justified in cutting that person off completely, Libras maintain some level of connection. Not because they're pushovers. Not because they can't set boundaries. But because they understand that life is long and circumstances change, and the person who's your adversary today might be your ally tomorrow. I've seen Libras maintain cordial relationships with ex-partners, with former colleagues who left on bad terms, with family members who've been difficult, and years later, those relationships end up being valuable in ways nobody could have predicted. The ex-partner introduces them to someone who becomes a crucial business connection. The difficult colleague reaches out with an opportunity. The family member comes through in a crisis. And the Libra isn't surprised because they've been tending those relationships all along, keeping doors open that other people would have slammed shut. And here's what I think is really profound about this. Libras understand that life isn't a series of isolated moments. Everything is connected. Every interaction has ripple effects. Every relationship is part of a larger web. And they're operating with that understanding in a way that gives them this incredible advantage over people who are just reacting to whatever's in front of them right now. This long game thinking also means Libras are incredibly resilient when things don't go their way in the short term. They don't panic when a plan falls through or when they face a setback. They just adjust, recalibrate, find another path. Because they're not attached to any single outcome. They're attached to the larger trajectory. They know that if this door closes, another one will open. And they're patient enough to wait for it and strategic enough to position themselves so they're ready when it does. I've watched Libras navigate career setbacks, relationship endings, major life disruptions, and they do it with this grace that's honestly inspiring. Not because they're not affected by these things, Libras feel deeply, but because they have this faith in the larger pattern. This trust that if they keep showing up with integrity and strategy and care, things will work out. Not necessarily in the way they originally planned, but in a way that serves their larger purpose. And I really believe this is what makes Libras truly unstoppable. It's not any single skill or trait. It's this combination of seeing all angles, reading people accurately, creating beauty and harmony, choosing battles strategically, building genuine connections, and playing the long game. When you put all of that together, you get someone who's operating at a level that most people can't even perceive, let alone compete with. But here's something really important that I want to make sure you understand. All of these abilities, all of these secrets, they come with a cost. Being a Libra isn't easy. Seeing all angles means you're constantly aware of complexity that other people get to ignore. Reading people so accurately means you see things about them that you might wish you didn't see. Creating harmony often means you're the one doing the emotional labor to maintain it. Playing the long game requires patience that can be exhausting. And making everyone feel valued means you're constantly giving energy to others. I've talked to so many Libras who feel drained by their own abilities, who wish they could just not see all the angles for once, who wish they could be more selfish, more direct, more willing to burn bridges when people deserve it, who feel like they're carrying the weight of maintaining harmony in every space they occupy. And that's real. That's a genuine challenge with being a Libra. But here's what I've also observed. The Libras who are truly unstoppable. The ones who are using these abilities to their full potential. They've learned how to protect their energy. They've learned when to engage and when to step back. They've learned that they don't have to fix every situation or maintain harmony in every relationship. They've learned to be strategic not just with others, but with themselves, with their own time and energy and emotional resources. And I think this is actually the most important lesson we can learn from Libras. Because what makes them unstoppable isn't just their abilities. It's their wisdom in knowing how to use those abilities without destroying themselves in the process. It's their understanding that being powerful doesn't mean being available to everyone all the time. It's their recognition that sometimes the most strategic move is to do nothing, to let situations resolve themselves, to conserve their energy for battles that actually matter. I've been observing this pattern with successful Libras across different fields. And there's something really consistent that I've noticed. The ones who thrive, who truly embody that unstoppable quality, they've all learned to create what I call strategic distance. They're warm and engaging when they choose to be, but they're also comfortable being unavailable. They don't feel guilty about protecting their time and energy. They don't feel obligated to solve every problem or mediate every conflict just because they have the ability to do so. And this is where I think a lot of people misunderstand Libras. They see a Libra setting boundaries or choosing not to engage with something, and they think the Libra is being cold or has changed. But what's actually happening is the Libra is being strategic. They're recognizing that their energy is finite and valuable, and they're choosing to invest it where it will have the most impact, where it aligns with their larger goals, where it serves their long-term vision. I watched this play out with a Libra friend who used to be the person everyone called when they had drama or needed advice or wanted someone to mediate their conflicts. And for years, she showed up for everyone. She was always available, always willing to help, always putting other people's needs before her own. And she was exhausted, completely drained, starting to resent the variabilities that made her so valuable to others. And then something shifted. She started saying no, not in a mean way, not in a way that burned bridges, but in a clear, firm way that communicated she wasn't available for every crisis anymore. She started being selective about which situations she engaged with and which ones she let people figure out on their own. And you know what happened? The people who genuinely valued her respected those boundaries. The people who were just using her energy got upset and drifted away. And she ended up with more energy, better relationships, and actually more influence because she was investing her abilities strategically instead of scattering them everywhere. This is what I mean when I say Libras are unstoppable. It's not just about having these incredible abilities. It's about having the wisdom to use them in a way that's sustainable, that serves your larger purpose, that doesn't leave you depleted and resentful. And the Libras who figure this out, who learn to be as strategic with their own energy as they are with everything else, they become absolutely formidable. Now, there's one more aspect of this that I think is really important to talk about. And it's something that doesn't get discussed enough when people talk about Libra energy. Libras have this incredible capacity for transformation, not just of situations or relationships or environments, but of themselves. They're constantly evolving, constantly refining, constantly becoming more sophisticated versions of who they were before. I've noticed this pattern where Libras will go through these periods of intense self-reflection and recalibration. They'll step back from their usual social engagement. They'll get quiet. They'll seem less available. And people around them sometimes worry that something's wrong or that the Libra is upset with them. But what's actually happening is the Libra is upgrading their operating system. They're processing everything they've learned, integrating new insights, adjusting their strategies, refining their approach, and when they come back from these periods, they're operating at a higher level. They've incorporated new understanding. They've let go of patterns that weren't serving them. They've developed new capabilities. It's like they've been in a chrysalis, and they emerge transformed, not in a way that makes them unrecognizable, but in a way that makes them more effective, more powerful, more aligned with their true potential. This capacity for self-transformation is part of what makes Libras so unstoppable. They're not static. They're not stuck in one way of being or one way of operating. They're constantly learning from their experiences, constantly adapting, constantly evolving, and because they have that ability to see all angles, they can see themselves clearly too. They can recognize their own patterns, their own blind spots, their own areas for growth, and they're willing to do the work to address those things. I've seen Libras completely reinvent themselves multiple times over the course of their lives. Not because they're flaky or inconsistent, but because they're responsive to what life is teaching them. They're willing to let go of identities and strategies that worked in one phase of life but don't work anymore. They're willing to admit when they were wrong about something and adjust their approach. They're willing to be beginners again in new areas, to be vulnerable in the process of learning, to risk looking foolish in pursuit of growth. And this willingness to transform, combined with all their other abilities, creates this momentum that's really hard to stop. Because just when you think you understand a Libra, just when you think you've figured out their patterns, they've already evolved past that version of themselves. They're already operating from a new level of understanding. They're already implementing strategies you haven't seen from them before. I think this is also why Libras often surprise people with their success. People see them being nice, being accommodating, being focused on relationships and harmony, and they assume that means the Libra isn't ambitious or isn't strategic about their own advancement. But that's a massive misreading of what's actually happening. Libras are incredibly ambitious. They just pursue their ambitions in a way that doesn't look like traditional ambition. They're not stepping on people to get ahead. They're not burning bridges or making enemies. They're not engaging in obvious power plays. Instead, they're building networks of genuine relationships. They're creating value for others in ways that naturally create value for themselves. They're positioning themselves so that when opportunities arise, they're the obvious choice. They're playing a game that's so sophisticated most people don't even realize it's happening. And then suddenly, the Libra is in a position of significant influence or success. And people are shocked. How did that happen? When did that happen? But if you were paying attention, if you understood what the Libra was actually doing all along, it's not surprising at all. It's the natural result of years of strategic relationship building, careful positioning, and patient execution of a long-term vision. I've also noticed that Libras have this interesting relationship with power that's different from most other signs. They're not uncomfortable with power. They're not afraid of it. But they also don't pursue it in obvious ways. They understand that the most effective power is often invisible power. The power to influence without being seen as influential. The power to shape outcomes without being the obvious decision maker. The power to create change without taking credit for it. This is why you often find Libras in roles that are technically secondary, but actually incredibly influential. They're the advisor to the CEO who's actually shaping all the major decisions. They're the team member who's not the manager, but who everyone goes to for guidance. They're the family member who's not the patriarch or matriarch, but who's actually holding the whole family system together. They're comfortable with that kind of power because they understand it's often more effective than the obvious, visible kind. And I think this is part of what makes them so unstoppable. Because they're not threatening to people in the way that more obvious power seekers are. People don't feel the need to compete with them or undermine them because they don't perceive them as a threat. And by the time people realize how much influence the Libra actually has, it's too late. The Libra has already built something that can't be easily dismantled. Now, I want to talk about something that's really important for understanding the full picture of why Libras are so unstoppable, and that's their relationship with justice and fairness. Because this isn't just about being nice or wanting everyone to get along. Libras have this deep, almost visceral need for things to be fair, for people to be treated equitably, for systems to work in a way that honors everyone's dignity and rights. And when that sense of justice is violated, when they see unfairness or injustice, that's when you see a completely different side of Libra. That's when all that strategic patience and careful relationship building gets channeled into something much more forceful. That's when the Libra stops being accommodating and becomes absolutely relentless in pursuit of making things right. I've watched Libras take on powerful institutions, challenge corrupt systems, stand up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. And they do it in a way that's incredibly effective because they bring all their abilities to bear on the situation. They see all the angles, so they know exactly where the system is vulnerable. They read people accurately, so they know who the real allies and enemies are. They build genuine connections, so they can mobilize support. They play the long game, so they're willing to pursue justice even when it takes years. And this is where Libras become truly unstoppable. Because they're not just fighting for themselves. They're fighting for a principle. They're fighting for fairness. And that gives them a kind of moral authority and persistence that's really hard to counter. People can dismiss someone who's just pursuing their own interests. But it's much harder to dismiss someone who's genuinely fighting for justice, who's willing to sacrifice their own comfort and convenience to make things right. I think this is also why Libras often end up in positions where they're advocating for others. Whether that's formally as lawyers or activists or union representatives, or informally as the person in their workplace or community who speaks up when things aren't fair. They can't help it. It's part of their core nature. And when they channel all their abilities into that pursuit of justice, they become a force that's really difficult to stop. So when you put all of this together, when you understand all 6 of these secrets and how they work in combination, you start to see why Libras are so unstoppable. It's not any one thing. It's the whole package. It's someone who can see all angles, read people accurately, create beauty and harmony, choose battles strategically, build genuine connections, play the long game, protect their energy, transform themselves, wield invisible power, and fight relentlessly for justice when it matters. That's a formidable combination. That's someone who's operating at a level that most people can't match. And the beautiful thing is, most Libras don't even fully realize how powerful they are. They're just being themselves, using their natural abilities, following their instincts. They're not trying to be unstoppable. They just are. And I think that's the final secret. The one that ties everything together. Libras are unstoppable because they're authentic. All of these abilities, all of these strategies, they're not calculated manipulations. They're natural expressions of who Libras are at their core. They genuinely want harmony. They genuinely value fairness. They genuinely care about people. They genuinely see beauty and possibility where others see chaos. And that authenticity is what makes everything else work. Because people can sense authenticity. They can tell when someone is being genuine versus when someone is performing. And Libras, for all their strategic sophistication, are fundamentally genuine. They mean what they say. They care about what they claim to care about. They're not wearing a mask. They're just being themselves. And themselves happens to be incredibly powerful. So if you're a Libra watching this, I hope you're starting to see yourself more clearly. I hope you're recognizing that the abilities you might have taken for granted or even seen as weaknesses are actually incredible strengths. I hope you're understanding that your way of operating, even though it's different from the more obvious, aggressive approaches to power and success, is actually more effective in the long run. And I hope you're feeling empowered to own your abilities, to use them strategically, to protect your energy, and to pursue your vision with confidence. And if you're not a Libra but you have Libras in your life, I hope this has given you a new appreciation for what they're actually doing. I hope you're seeing past the surface level pleasantness to the sophisticated strategy underneath. I hope you're recognizing the value they bring to your life and your relationships and your communities, and I hope you're treating them with the respect and appreciation they deserve. Because they're probably doing more for you than you even realize. The truth is Libras are playing a different game than most people. They're operating from a different paradigm. They're pursuing success and influence and impact in a way that doesn't look like traditional ambition, but that's actually more sustainable and more effective. They're building something that lasts. That creates real value. That makes the world more harmonious and beautiful and just, and they're doing it in a way that honors their values. That maintains their integrity. That allows them to sleep well at night knowing they haven't compromised who they are in pursuit of what they want. That's what makes Libras truly unstoppable. Not just their abilities, but their commitment to using those